The Public Services Committee meeting will begin in 1 minute.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Public Services Committee meeting. It's Tuesday, October 10th at 5 p.m. Just call this meeting to order. Looking for a motion for approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll move to our first report and update. Our first item today is the City Charter 101 by Attorney David Feifley. Just talking about having a overview of the charter revision process and what that all entails. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate you being here today. Dave Feifley with the City Attorney's Office. Appreciate you putting this off a month. I had some personal items to take care of last month with the surgery, so I appreciate it. I think before we go into the specific question of how does one make proposals to the voters on amending the charter, if you'll give me your indulgence for a couple minutes, I'll just kind of explain the charter history. The state constitution was amended by the South Dakota voters in 1962, and it added a Title 9, Section 2, which allowed for home rule charter government for municipalities. This was an effort, from what I understand from my political science days, led by Dr. Bill Farber of University of South Dakota. And then the voters also approved another amendment to the state constitution in 1972 to allow counties and also a combination of cities and counties to create home rule governments. Some specific requirements under the state constitution in adopting our charter that they have to be approved by an election after being presented by a petition of 10% of the registered voters. The home rule government unit may exercise any power not denied by the Constitution, the general laws of the state, or its own charter. The charter may provide for any form of executive, legislative, and administrative structure which will be superior authority to any state statute. The legislative body must be elected by popular election, and administrative proceedings must be subject to judicial review. After the adoption in 62 and 1972, the state legislature came in 1974 and adopted Chapter 6-12, which provided several limits on home rule governments. And I'll get back to that in a moment. So let's take it to Sioux Falls. The Citizens for Modern City Government was a group of about 63 individuals that formed in the early 1990s here in Sioux Falls. It consisted of a wide range of people from all walks of life and interests. It was co-chaired by Pauline Politis, who was head of the League of Women Voters, and by Bill Peterson, who is a former state legislator. Dick Gregerson was also a member of that group. The group had gained support from the Sioux Falls Argus leader, among many other community groups, and they proposed a municipal charter based on the 7th edition of the Model City Charter, which is put out by the National Civic League. Our version of the charter that was originally adopted was almost verbatim from that model charter, with a couple exceptions. How the charter system came about was in about 1894, there was a National Municipal League. Its first keynote speaker was the future president, Theodore Roosevelt. And any chance I get to quote Theodore Roosevelt, I have to do it. If you'll bear with me. He told his fellow founders at that meeting, there are two gospels I always preach to reformers. The first is the gospel of morality. The next is the gospel of efficiency. I don't have to tell you to be upright, but I do think I have to tell you to be practical and efficient. After a series of model city charters, which first started in 1900, the 7th edition was released in 1989, and that's the model that provided for us. The commentary on the model city charter, the 7th edition, states that it rejected the separation of powers concept, which characterized national and state governments. The dominant note in our new model city charter is the elimination of the system of checks and balances in the organization of our cities, and the substitution, therefore, of responsible government under a small legislative chamber, which in turn selects a single administrative head. The city manager plan not merely represents the type in common use in business corporations, but also in parliamentary government. The model city charter commentary goes on to say that it endorses a unitary structure of government. Alternative approaches were also included, including replacement of the city manager with an elected mayor, which is what the Citizens for Modern Government proposed for our city to its voters and was ultimately adopted. Then the model city charter also notes that larger municipalities tend to prefer a strong elected mayor, and that the model charter could be readily adopted to fit that form. Now, the model city charter rests policy decisions with a single elected legislative body. That's you folks, the city council. For the executive structure, all officials are to be appointed by and under the direction of the chief executive. The charter sets forth a leadership structure which can vary from state law, but it does not expand any powers otherwise granted by the state constitution or state law. I believe this is a misperception by some that say, well, we are a home rule charter entity, so we can, I've even heard many times, we can do whatever we want. No, we cannot. To dispel that myth, absolutely not. We follow a state statute. The only thing that we do differently is it's not what we do, it's who decides what to do it. So the leadership structure is what is unique about our city charter versus a state law run municipality, or as they would call themselves, a statutory municipality. Now, I've mentioned that a few sections of our charter are different from the model charter. First, there were some citizens that were concerned that the home rule charter could be used to impose a personal or corporate income tax. Section 1.04 of our charter specifically states that city government cannot adopt an income tax. Section 105 of the charter also says, as an additional protection, that any measure for new taxes by the city council must automatically be referred to the voters. So if it's a new tax, something that isn't provided in state law, it would have to be referred to the voters. Section 2.01 on the powers of the council is tweaked from the model charter, adding the provision that the council shall act as a part-time policy-making and legislative body, avoiding management and administrative issues. Section 2.02 is unique to our city charter, provides a compromise between having either all at-large or all by district councilors. In talking with the Citizens for Modern Government group, and some of their memoranda indicate too, that was actually the hottest debated issue, was whether to have councilors all by district, all at large, or a mixture of. They came up with the compromise that we still have today, where we have 5 by district and then 3 at large. So they felt that was the best way to represent the city in a cohesive manner and have a representative legislative body. Third, this section 3.01 is different from the model charter, provides that the executive and administrative power of the city shall be vested in a mayor. Now, with that background, I think it's important to just think on that background in light of what possible amendments could be coming forth and how that process takes place. So section 8 of our charter provides the methods by which it could be amended. First, it states in any manner provided by law. That means under state law. Again, referring to that chapter 6-12 of the South Dakota Codified Laws, provides that a governing body or a charter commission may present a proposed charter amendment or a charter itself to the electorate, and also provides for an initiated petition as stated in our charter. A second method is the city council can adopt an ordinance which is then deemed a proposal to the voters, and that must be approved by the voters to become a section in the charter. Now, that section in our charter does provide for certain sections that may not be amended by a council-passed ordinance as a proposal. And those are the section 1.04 cannot be amended. And that's, again, the no income tax limitation, among others. You can't grant more liquor licenses than state law allows. You cannot permit increased gaming activities or incur additional debt than that allowed by the state constitution. Another one is you cannot amend by ordinance section 1.05. Again, that's the no new taxes unless referred to the voters. And you can't amend by ordinance the section 2.01 on powers of the council, 2.02 composition of the council, again, the 5 by district, the 3 at large, and excuse me, your term limits and your terms of 4 years of 2 terms. You cannot amend by ordinance section 2.03 regarding the mayor as a member of the council and the mayor succession plan. You cannot amend by ordinance proposal section 2.04 elected officials compensation. So that cannot be done by an ordinance of the council with approval of the voters. And then the final one is Article 3 on the mayor powers, qualifications, duties, and veto power. So those are the specific sections that cannot be amended by ordinance of the council for a proposal to be passed by the voters later. Another method for amendment of the charter is, of course, by a report of the Charter Revision Commission. This has been the practice. This report is given to the city clerk. It's presented as a report to the city council and then placed on the ballot in April, and I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. And a final way that a charter amendment can come about is by the voters of the city when presented with a valid petition. It requires that a petition be registered by 15 voters with the city clerk, and then they need to obtain 5% of the signatures of the registered voters, similar to an initiative or a referendum. And going through prior charter proposals, over 8 elections, we've had anywhere from 3 to 10 items each time for revision to the charter. These proposals have overwhelmingly been approved, all but one in the history of those elections. And the one that was not approved by the voters, there was feedback after the fact. It was simply too lengthy, too many words. We copied a provision from another home rule charter community in Nebraska. It just set forth in greater detail the powers and limitations on power. It just got confusing for people. There were quite a number of other items on the ballot at that time that were I think it was 2012. There were some other very lengthy proposals on the ballot, and I think there was some voter fatigue there, to be honest, and so that one didn't pass. But the other 2 of the 3 that year did. Now, in discussing these, the Charter Revision Commission has always used, to the best of my knowledge, a supermajority vote in order to place things on the ballot. And what that means is they're not going to just approve something by a majority vote to place on the ballot, but it's as a supermajority, 4 out of 5 of the members. Generally, the Charter Revision Commission has been made up of usually people with lots of experience in local government. Our current Charter Revision Commission has a former member of the school board, a former city councilor, another spouse of a former city councilor, excuse me, an attorney who represents a number of local governments, and then finally Pauline Politis, who co-chaired the Citizens for Modern Government and has been living with the charter and the amendments for much of her lifetime. So that is the makeup of our very informed and educated Charter Revision Commission. Now, in terms of upcoming meetings of the commission, they are sending out an invite for public input from councilors, city directors, mayor, anyone who wants to comment on possible amendments to be considered by the commission. All these meetings will be at excuse me, Carnegie Town Hall at 4 p.m. And they're going to cover each session, they'll do 3 sections of the charter each time. And this is, they've used this a couple times now. It's been very effective. So November 1 will be sections 1, 2, and 3 of the charter. November 15, excuse me, sections 4, 5, and 6 of the charter. December 6 will be sections 7, 8, and 9. And then they've set December 20 as a wrap-up for any final consideration, final tweaks of proposals. And they've left open the possibility that they may need to meet again for another wrap-up session in early January. Now, the charter requires, excuse me, I've got dry mouth today. If there are any report to the council, it needs to be within a 60 to 120 day period. So it's early February when the actual deadline would be for a report. The Charter Revision Commission has always strived to present that by mid-January, and they present it publicly to the at a city council meeting. And they found that this just gives the public a little bit more notice of what's coming. And so they would do that by actually filing the report with the city clerk and presenting a few-minute presentation discussing the proposals and how they came about to you. And it's a good way to educate and inform the voters on what is coming. So in a nutshell, that is the Charter Amendment Process 101, and I just thank you for indulging me to give you a little bit of the history on how it came about. So any questions? Happy to take them.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Lots of good information. Is there any discussion or questions from the committee? Councilor Selberg? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. How often did you say the Charter Revision Commission meets?
They usually meet about 4 or 5 times a year, Councilor Selberg. By ordinance, they're required to meet 1 time per year, in any calendar year, that is.
Okay, so it kind of depends what's on the agenda, or is 4 or 5 generally normal, or just it varies from 1 to 5, just depends on the schedule, or what's up?
It really does. I mean, it's up to them. They're citizen volunteers. We appreciate their time, and that this method of doing 3 sections per meeting, they've done the last few cycles, and it's worked fairly well.
What were the amendments that you said took a supermajority vote, 4 out of 5, to change?
Before any item would be included in the commission's report to be presented to the council, which means it would go on to the ballot, they require 4 out of the 5 of them approve of it.
Yeah, okay.
So this has been a long-standing commission policy, and certainly some other citizen boards require that too, depending on what it is. But something of utter importance in terms of, is this really something we want to amend in the charter or repeal? The commission has always felt that, yeah, the 4 votes should be necessary.
So recently we just had a discussion about how we're elected and how those rules may change. So things such as, again, you talked about the mixture of the districts and that type of thing, or our compensation, those type of things are something that we could never, as a council, bring up or have a part or a vote on, right, that goes to that?
If I'm understanding your question properly, we follow, by charter, state election law. I think it's in section 601 that talks about we would follow the election laws of the state of South Dakota. As far as, yes, how many district versus at-large representatives you have, it would be by charter, and that would require an amendment to change that. And you as a council couldn't do it via an ordinance with a proposal to them. On the majority vote issue that you were talking about, that is only in the election ordinances. That is not in the charter. So.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilor Staley?
I wanted to just go through this timeline. I'll just use an example. Before we had a charter amendment where we changed the date for filing a petition. There was something. We are live. Yes, that was it.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think we were changing a timeline as to when the petitions were going to be turned in to, yeah, there was some timeline that got diminished for elections. that was talked about. But let's just say, just for the sake of discussion, that we're talking about changing a deadline. And so, and a citizen wants to do that. So they find the time, one of these dates where they're going to be discussing that article. They come in, and so anybody can come in and present that to them.
Correct, Counselor.
Any council member, anybody. So they
Doors are wide open.
okay,
Absolutely.
So they're saying this to them. Let's say they come in on November 1st, and they do that. Then the committee is just taking all that information in. They don't have. Do they have a lot of dialogue with the person? Do they open it up for testimony from other people at that time?
It varies on the proposal, Counselor. I mean, and each one is unique. Generally, I mean, what I've seen over time is that the commission will ask questions, they'll make sure they understand it, and they'll kind of look around amongst the 5 of them. Is anyone interested in this as a proposal going forward where we want to keep talking about it? And that's different from placing it on the ballot, obviously, but it's just in terms of, is this something we want to go forward? And usually they'll task the city attorney to say, okay, why don't you draft up the proposal, or if it's already written, you know, try and put it in a form that we can talk about either at the next meeting or as the wrap-up occurs. So that's how those happen.
So a person coming in on November 1st with an issue could get the sense that it was a dead end right there. The charter committee could say, we're not interested in having it in draft form. I mean, could they give them kind of a thumbs down?
It could be resurrected too, Counselor. I mean, it's hard to predict what the commission may think. I mean, they may just hear it and say, we'll think about it, and then 2 meetings later say, you know what, I think we want to talk about that a little more and bring it up again. So
Okay, so that
and again, just so, if I may interrupt, for the public's benefit, all those meetings will be televised. So if a concerned person misses one in particular, they can certainly watch it on CityLink and catch it. And again, we not only have public input at those meetings, we also have, you know, an email, and we take phone calls, and you can call Carrie Hainsel of our office. She's the commission's secretary. If you have a proposal, you can send it to Carrie. You can call Carrie. So there are more. If you miss a particular meeting, you're not missing, because you can send it in other ways.
right, but you might, so it doesn't mean that, okay, so November 15th, they're doing Articles 4, 5, and 6. So you're saying that they could also be weaving back in on the 15th, the Article 1 that was discussed on November 1st. So these things are, it's not like compartmentalized that this is going to be on this November 1st is only 1, 2, and 3, that they're going to be bringing this forward. So it could be they're discussing your issue on November 1st, and they're going to be talking about it more on December 20th.
Right, and again, to add to that, I mean, you could have items, say, discussed November 1st, and they could appear again on November 15th as new business or old business again. It can keep coming back, and if anything gains traction, what I've seen the commission do is they keep talking about it every time. It just builds.
Right,
but what they're trying to do with the meeting structure is to say, we especially want to hear sections 1, 2, 3 this week, this time, and then the next time. It just makes it more orderly so that it's not a hodgepodge all at once.
So then, but let's say a citizen is bringing something forward, wouldn't they want to be present to listen to the discussion and perhaps give input at those other meetings?
Absolutely, yes.
So it's not, so if you have something, Article 1 on November 1st, you're probably going to want to be present in all these other meetings that you gave us, right?
Yes.
Because there's more debate to be had. Okay, so then on the wrap-up date, and you said December 20th or in January, last date, and maybe in February. So we come to some point in this process where the Charter Revision Commission is going to say, this is what we are going to solidify on the ballot.
I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I mean, we encourage them to, out of courtesy to the council and to the citizens, have it completely wrapped up and have a final report filed with the city clerk by around that 10th, 12th of January. It just makes for, because then we can do the report to the city council at the 3rd council meeting of January, whatever date that is, and then it's a much more orderly way to handle the final report.
So then let's say that the city council wants to, because they also have an opportunity to do it themselves.
Correct, by ordinance.
So what's the timeline? Could the city council start talking about that now?
Yes,
And what's the last, and that's going to look like an ordinance? We have to have a first and second reading of that?
correct.
Okay, so what's the last date that we'd have to have a second reading
I've heard,
approved by?
well, in terms of it doesn't have an effective date because it has to be submitted immediately to the voters. So it has not been done yet. That would be an historic first, to have the council present a proposal via ordinance. I would have to go back and look at my calendar, but I'm thinking that early February timeframe, you would want to have your first, second reading done in January, so there wouldn't be any issues about a timeframe.
And maybe our city clerk can say, what, is there like a,
Mr. Pfeiffer, so 60 days out would be February 9th, so the meeting preceding that would be February 6th, so.
Okay.
the second reading would have to happen by February.
Thank you, Tom.
And then one more question. Then
go ahead,
the other, please, we're talking about the voters' ability, the citizens to raise this up. Can they do that at any time during the year? Form the committee of 15 people and come pass
As
it?
long as they make the deadline, like Tom indicated, of that February 9th, have a valid petition filed with the city clerk. And
Because,
again, the Charter Revision Commission also takes public input, and they have certainly adopted proposals from citizens before, so.
But do they have a 6-month window like we do with an initiative to collect the signatures?
The general initiative law says 6 months in terms of valid signatures, so I would think that would apply in all likelihood to a charter-initiated measure also. State law is silent on it, so I would say likely, more likely than not, it'd be the 6 months. So good point, Counselor.
Thank you.
But can I ask a follow-up to that, though? If you have, if you want to get it on the ballot for an April, though, you'd probably want to do it sooner than later than.
Well, I mean, so what would the deadline, I would assume it's the February 6th deadline?
Correct, yes, yes.
February 9.
I mean, for a petition, whatever's going
Wouldn't
to be
really
happening.
necessarily have 6 months from today until that time because of.
And the thing you need to remember, when I say a valid petition has been filed with the city clerk, that's got several legal connotations to it. It's not just physically taking your petition sheets and giving them over to Tom Greco. It's actually that the 6,000 and some signatures are validated. They're valid through that process, and that it is deemed filed by February 9th. So you'd want to do that well in advance. Give yourself a few weeks for the validation process.
Go ahead.
And again, on the 6-month window, that's just in terms of you count signatures up to 6 months back. So that would be where that would come.
Well, so let's say that John Doe is going to do this, and this next June, they say, we've got this charter revision idea, and we start a petition drive in June, then, and submit it, then it just kind of stays on the back burner till the next election? Or, I mean, how does that look?
Yeah, I mean,
you-
I'm sorry, I
you
thought
do
we
it
were talking
anytime?
about this election
Well,
cycle.
I'm talking, it could be this, but now I'm going to forward. Can someone do a charter revision petition drive at any time during the year, at any year?
I would believe so, yes, Counselor.
So then it would they have to come together to approve that, or does that has nothing to do with the Charter Revision Commission?
Let's take your example of June. Let's say June of 18, you have 15 registered voters come in, register a petition for a charter amendment, and they go around for 6 months and turn in those petition sheets. I mean, you would then count the signatures up to 6 months
Right.
before, and if it's deemed a valid petition, then it would be placed on the next available election, which would be, I'll look at the city clerk for that date.
For 2020, I don't have that off the top of my head.
Our vision isn't 2020 on that one
But
yet.
could it be in conjunction with the school board election if the city council would call for an advisory vote?
you would have to have a special election. You couldn't do an advisory vote on a charter amendment. It would have to be an actual
But could you
special
pair
election.
it with the school board election like we did with Drake Springs
It would
to
be
save money?
possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Counselor Starr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like our being able to have committee meetings and being a little more informal and get a chance to kind of follow up a little more. Attorney Fifley, one of the things that stood out to me when I attended the first meeting of the Charter Revision Committee was the discussion of a majority or a supermajority to be on the ballot. For me, being kind of wonky, that seemed to stand out that was more of a policy decision of that board rather than something that the charter would point out. Is that, I know you mentioned that there were other boards that kind of have that internal policy, but it seems like it gives the minority a little more power in that type of thing, depending on how you look at it. I mean, you could say it takes a supermajority, or it could take a minority to kill something, or not allow it to go on the ballot, or a small minority to, if we're going to, as I'm crafting terms as I'm talking out loud.
I mean,
but
every board or commission within the city is allowed to set their own procedural rules and bylaws, and certainly I've had a chance to look at all 42 boards and commissions in terms of votes required, and it's not unusual that the commission would have requiring a supermajority. I was not present for the genesis of this, Counselor, so, but from what has been explained to me over the years that I've been here is that the commission felt to have something of such importance. The charter is like a constitution, and certainly the commentary to the model charter talks about being cautious about changing the charter. It's not like doing an ordinance, because an ordinance, if you find out it's not working properly, probably within 60 days, you as a council could come back, repeal or amend it and make it work. If we have a charter amendment or repeal passed, you're in all likelihood waiting 2 years to perhaps rectify it if everyone comes to realize, oops, maybe this wasn't as good of idea as we thought it was. And that happens. That's life. And as you know, in public life, that can happen. So I think the importance of that was the commission felt to have something of that importance, we want to make sure that most of us think it's a good idea. And again, I think in terms of the representation, the different types of people that are on the Charter Revision Commission, you have a couple people that are, spouse or a former counselor, you have a school board member, you have an attorney that's represented all those types of governments. So and then one who led the effort and led the League of Women Voters and was devoted most of her life to better government for our citizens. So I think, yeah, in terms of, I think it makes sense.
it's just one of those things that stands out as something that's such a formalized process, a constitution, to kind of leave that up to a decision of the policy-making board. It stands out to me. And that's more the point that I was trying to make, that for something that is that formal and that important, to leave that out of, that seems like something that would normally be in a charter or a constitution type of document, that it would be there. And like I said, it's probably more wonky than most of us want to go down that road. The other thing that stands out to me as we talk about the revision process and the committee itself is that you have a group of appointed officials, both by the administration and the mayor, or with the advice and consent of the council, having direct access to the ballot when you take appointed people or an appointed group rather than an elected body that has that direct access to the ballot. Stands out to me as one of those things that's kind of a little quirky in what we do. The other part of that is, sorry, I was just cruising through my notes a minute and I kind of lost my place. I apologize. Talk a little bit about why the founders really, we've looked at some of the history and your knowledge of the changes, but why they really set aside some of those things that the council can't make amendments, but then the council has to come before the Charter Revision Committee. Again, the ones that you listed, and I think that was really an essential part of what we're doing. So in that roundabout way of me asking more of the history of why they picked those sections, if it really was that important that those sections, whether it's pay, whether it's an income tax of all things, why on the multiple lists of taxes that we could choose, but that one, at that time, was that something that was real standing out to that group?
I don't recall much in the written record of any kind, Counselor, in terms of why those particular sections were selected as ones for the charter where the council couldn't amend them by an ordinance and proposal. It's my guess, based on certainly you're a student of history as well, and you can appreciate this, where I mean, you just look at how many times they've gone over congressional pay raises and how many times that's changed, and you can't do it where it'll affect you as a Congress member, but maybe your future down the road. So I think in terms of the 63 individuals that comprise that group, I'm sure there must have been some very loud proponents of putting those particular sections there where we don't want the legislative body the ability to affect their own workings. We'd rather have it come from a commission, which is provided by state law and our charter, or allow it by initiative, the people themselves to decide how that works. So my guess is those 63 individuals, and there were a lot of very strong opinions I know from those individuals, having grown up in Sioux Falls. I know some of them, and yeah, they very strong opinions. I'm guessing that all came out of those discussions.
And to limit a lot of power from an elected body, as we're, taking that where you have 5 appointed individuals who do have I think we've got a really great task force of people, but to have that direct access to changing the charter / constitution is interesting, that it really affects a lot of, it's a lot more difficult even for the council to pass something that's not in that, where you have an appointed body, I guess, is where I'm weighing that, because every other group that we have of citizens that we put together don't have that decision-making power. And the charter really vested a lot of importance and power to the knowledge of these 5 individuals as part of that. And more than anything, thank them for their service.
I think their workings indicate how respectful they are of their role by requiring that supermajority, by taking in lots of public input. And certainly my experience has been, in terms of selecting the commission members, there is a lot of input from counselors as well as the mayor. And I will say that I think the group is beyond reproach in terms of being a good cross-section of local government interested people, and people who've certainly had the interests of our citizens at heart for most of their careers. So I'd echo your comments. We're very fortunate.
I think what's interesting is that they have a chance to really affect turnout, because sometimes in some of the non-mayoral years, let's put it that way, the things that they do put on the ballot probably have a chance to affect turnout as much as the candidates for council, depending on whether they're a little controversial or kind of forward-thinking. Would you agree?
I'd have to have the election turnouts to really analyze that. I don't know.
More anecdotally than anything, that it seems like that you would have the power to influence turnout based on how interesting, I guess, some of the amendments could be. So, my statement, I'll agree to it. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll follow up with just a couple. Just one question I know we talked a little bit about citizens bringing something forward. Do they have to have something written or some sort of proposal for it to be considered? It can be a concept, an organized thought, so to speak, but obviously the more organized you are, maybe the better to bring something forward. Is that safe to say?
That is safe to say, yes. It just helps to conceptualize the concept if it's written in some way and shows kind of where it might fit in the charter in terms of what section would be affected, and it always helps to have that language. Otherwise, if it's a concept stated, they'll direct our office to put it in draft form if any one of the commissioners is interested in talking and considering it further. And then we do our best to try and conceptualize it in writing, but again, who better than the person who's
Doing
bringing
it to
forth the
get
idea.
your intent, yeah, probably is easier that way. My other question, I know, my question was how many proposals were brought forward from the council, but you answered that as being 0. If a proposal is brought forward by the council, is it 5 or 6 votes to move that forward for election?
Any ordinance is a 5 votes, so that would be by 5 votes of the council also.
And is that something that can be vetoed?
I haven't had to look that up yet. 'Cause it's
I'm just
never happened.
curious. I'm just curious. We've seemed to have a few more of those, and so I'd just be curious if that is something that could be vetoed or not. It's an ordinance, so I guess I would think so, but
It'd be a research project, so.
I don't want to assume, so thank you. No, thank you for this. I think it's very eye-opening. You know, I've been here for, a few years, and so I've learned a lot here as we've moved forward and trying to understand more of how this, how a change can be made if it's with our charter. So thank you for your time. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
No, this was really simply informational, so no action items, so to speak, from the committee today. I'll move to the next item of open discussion. Any items for open discussion? I need to back up. I'm so sorry. Anything from the audience that has questions? I'm sorry. I'm remiss from that. Anyone here have any questions for Attorney Fifley or statements or anything? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to open discussion. Any open discussion from the committee? All right, seeing none, we'll adjourn this public services. Thank you.